In this next section, it's going to be two parts also. Section 25.2a, we're going to talk about air masses. This is the first part of 2. We're going to talk about the 4 main types. We're talking mainly North America. Dealing with meteorology, we have to consider air masses and how they impact our assessments and our ability to make predictions. So, what is an air mass? From a meteorological standpoint, let me say an air mass is a large body of air that remains stationary or moves slowly over a uniform surface. When it does this, whatever that underlying uniform surface is, the air mass will take on its characteristics in terms of humidity, the amount of water that it can hold, and temperature. So we're putting energy into the system or taking it out depending on what underlying surface it is. And it's the characteristics, how strong they take them on, depends on how long they linger or sit over a uniform surface. Air masses that form over the frozen polar regions, North Pole or South Pole, obviously are very cold. Because there's low energy, they can't hold as much humidity, which we studied in the last section, so they're very dry in terms of humidity content. And consequently, these air masses that form over tropical oceans are very warm, high energy, so they can hold a lot of moisture content in terms of their humidity content. And so because of this, we classify them by their source regions, so we know what kind of an air mass is coming at us. Obviously, you can't see it per se. Source, it comes over the cold polar areas. We label those with a capital P. We're going to be naming these things ultimately. So if we're coming down out of the north, coming over us, put a capital P, that means that's an air mass coming at us from the polar region. We obviously don't get too many from the South Pole. Ours are mostly North Pole. So we'll label with a capital P. Sources that come up from the warm tropical areas, we label with a capital T. So if they're coming up in that zone for us in our area, anything that moves up out of these areas, capital T says they're coming from the tropics. And air masses that come from the oceans, which we're in the center of the United States, but they still do reach us. Another word for water is maritime. Those we label with a little m. And if they come over from land down to us, we label them with a little c. And they're usually because they're forming over land that's in the middle of the continent. And these tend to be very dry as well. So we have 4 main types of air masses. In summary are maritime polar. So it's coming from the north, from the polar region, and it's coming off the water into us. So we label it little m for maritime, capital P for polar. So that's the source region, that's a big region. Maritime tropical, something comes off either the Pacific up towards us, or comes off the Atlantic or the Caribbean towards us. Those are maritime that come from the south, tropical, so little m, capital T. So these guys are maritime tropical sources. Continental polar, that's where it's coming off the land. We got Canada and Alaska, all that large swath of land. That can take on the characteristics of the air above that and move down to us. And that'd be C for continental, meaning land. Still coming from the north, so polar, CP. It's these guys right here. And finally, tropical, coming off the land. So off our great deserts, Mexico, any of that land where it forms there and starts to move up. Be tropical, so it's continental, coming off the land, tropical. So off the water from the poles, off the water from the tropics, off the land from the poles, off the land from the tropics. And that's our 4 types that affect us. And depending on which one's moving in, we can predict what kind of weather we're going to have. Air masses can and may remain over the sources for days, sometimes even weeks, intensifying, if you will, before eventually moving on to other regions due to the worldwide wind patterns pushing them. And that's the end of this section.